This is Contra Zoom,
where we go back and forth about film.
I'm Dakota Arsenault.
And I'm Rachel Ho.
The 2023 edition of the Toronto International Film Festival just wrapped up, and we're here to discuss some of the movies screened during the fest. A few weeks ago, we posted our preview episode where Rachel and I talked about movies that we are most excited for. Today, joining us to help us wrap up TIFF is Jeff Bulmer, one half of the Classic Movies Live podcast, and someone who contributed reviews that were posted on contrazoompod's website. Jeff wrote about Humanist Vampire Seeking Consenting Suicidal Person and I Don't Know Who You Are, both of which will be linked to in the show notes. And Jeff was last heard on episode 231, Best Films of 2022, where he sent a voicemail in praise of Babylon. Welcome back to the show, Jeff. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for letting me write those reviews. They were really good movies, and we're going to talk about at least one of them, so I'm excited to do that.
Yeah, no, it was really exciting to bring someone else into the fold and feature their work. It's something I've been wanting to do for a little bit. I'm trying to revamp the Contra Zoom website and make it more engaging, more exciting, and do more reviews and all that sort of stuff. So it was really awesome to have someone of your caliber agree to do a couple guest pieces.
Oh my goodness, someone of my caliber.
Yes.
You flatter me.
And hopefully this is not the end of both you appearing on the website and other people as well.
I hope that you can get other people of my caliber for your website.
That would be the dream. Now, I'd love to know about each of our TIFF experiences this year before we get into the award winners and then talk about specific films. Jeff, we will start with you. I'd love to know, how many films did you see this year and sort of what did you think of the festival overall?
So I saw 40. Which comes with the caveat that I am counting the Almodovar short, Strange Way of Life, because that actually got second screenings just for the short, even though it was brought there with the In Conversation With. I am counting that, but I saw 40 in total. Overall, I would say I had a really good festival this year. It's really hard for me to compare it with last year specifically, just because last year is so long ago now. But I remember that, last year I had seen a lot of movies that I really, really, really liked. And I definitely saw a couple big stinkers. This year, I would say I think there were a grand total of 4 movies that I thought weren't that good. And only one or two where I kind of wish I'd seen something else. So, I was working it out yesterday with Pierre. That's up to 10% bad movies if you want to go by ratios, but absolute numbers, that's 36 good movies over 2 weeks, which is incredible.
I'll say this. I was quite impressed. I saw both of your lists of what you saw, and I was shocked at just how many bangers both of you had, where I was like, oh wow, you guys saw all of the really good movies and you didn't completely overlap with what you ended up seeing. But I feel like all the high profile and well-reviewed movies, you both kind of saw all of them. So it was very impressive for that. I am curious to know, you have already recorded your TIFF episode with Pierre for Classic Movies Live. Are you able to talk a little bit about what you discussed on that people can maybe expect that you won't get here?
Yeah, we're not going to talk today about aggro drift, and I talked a lot about it on our episode with Pierre, on my episode with Pierre. So please go watch that, or please go listen to that episode, because aggro drift was such an interesting experience that it kind of made me rethink. It kind of just made me think movie ratings in total, altogether, are kind of bullshit. And I explain a lot more about that on my episode. So go listen for aggro drift content.
That's the Harmony Korine movie, right?
Yes, it is.
All right. Rachel, what about you? How was your TIFF and how many movies did you see this year?
I don't know the exact number. I think I saw probably just over 20, my guess would be. Yeah, it was okay. I think it's a bit of a strange year because I think that there's something going on with TIFF in terms of back end stuff that probably not very privy to. And I'm assuming will come to light in the next few months or whatever. But it does feel like there's a bit of a shift going on with the festival, and they're going to need to kind of recalibrate. I would agree with Jeff in that I didn't really see any. I think I saw one movie that I thought, oh, that's not a good movie. Everything else that I saw, I thought was fine. But kind of the flip side of that is I came away with maybe 2 films that I was like, these are really, really good. And I like would recommend them to a lot of people, or maybe 3 actually, 3 films, or 4. Okay. A few films that I would really recommend, but I would say it felt, it felt different. It was a bit more subdued this year. Not just because of the strike though. I don't think that the strike is that to me feels like a really easy explanation for it. But I do think that there is, a bit of a shift going on over at TIFF there. And it's going to be something that I'm curious to see how next year goes. I'll say that much. I'm very curious how next year is going to go in comparison to this year's. But yeah, everything seemed to go well. I mean, they had a few technical difficulties on the first day there, but after that, it seemed to be pretty smooth sailing afterwards.
Now, Rachel, one thing that we sort of discussed in our TIFF preview episode was that it felt like there was maybe a bit of a lack of super high-profile movies this year. Do you sort of feel that there may be some that rose to become the high-profile movies, or was it still maybe a festival year where TIFF just didn't really get them?
TIFF just didn't really get them, I think. I think you might be able to count the Holdovers and American Fiction, which won the People's Choice, though American Fiction specifically, because it actually premiered at TIFF, whereas Holdovers, I think, premiered at, I want to say Telluride. I don't think it premiered at TIFF, though. And I think that that's kind of the thing, where TIFF is meant to be this prestige film festival that is kicking off award season and, all the kind of the prestige films of the fall. But this year, I mean, all of the big stuff went to Venice, and then Telluride ended up getting a good chunk of like Poor Things, for example. That's a huge movie this year, or will be a huge movie this year. And Telluride got the North American premiere of that. So I know some people were saying, oh, it's because of the strike and because Venice is in Europe, but then Telluride still got good stuff. So I don't think that's, again, I think it's a very easy explanation, but I think it's a bit of a lazy one at this point. I think TIFF missed out on stuff, but I do think that some good things came out of it. I don't know, like in terms of awards thing, I probably would say it's just the 2, American Fiction and Holdovers. I don't know if anything else is really getting any push to become something bigger afterwards. And then in terms of just crowd enjoyment, there's probably one that I can think of that I think will be a big hit. But apparently, and that movie is Hitman. And apparently, though, that movie has not been purchased yet, which I was actually surprised to find out.
Actually, not. So as of this recording, I'm going to say about half an hour ago, a press release just came out that Netflix has bought Hitman.
Oh, good. I actually thought it felt like a good Netflix movie, to be honest. I don't know what that means, but it felt like a movie that Netflix said, okay, that's good. That's good. Because I do think it was surprising to me. I was talking to somebody, I think on Saturday probably, which was my last day of the festival. And he was saying that nobody had bought it yet, which I found very surprising. So yeah, okay, that's good. Good that it has a home, because I think that'll be a very good crowd pleaser for a lot of people.
Nice. Okay, yeah. One other question I have, you mentioned the strike a couple times. I'd sort of be curious about how the vibes were at the festival this year. Now, obviously, with the writers' strike and the actors' strike, that means for the most part, they were not present. But I know that if it was an international movie where it was not a SAG-AFTRA or WGA production, you could have talent there. Or if it was a Canadian production, they could be there. Or if they had signed the interim agreement, like studios like A24 and Neon and the like have, they'd still have talent there. So I'm sort of curious, what was it like? Was the crowd vibe different? Was the excitement there? I'd love to sort of know what the boots on the ground feeling was. Jeff, I'd love to hear from you first.
So the main experience I'm comparing it to is as much as I can remember of last year, where I also didn't see that much talent, mostly because I ended up going to second and third screenings. This year I noticed basically mostly no difference. I actually saw maybe more people involved with the movies at the screenings I went to, just because all the directors were always there, with one notable exception. And I saw a lot of international films, so when the movie did have cast, or a lot of the movies that I saw had the cast there as well, because they were from Korea or Germany or somewhere else, or a Nicolas Cage movie from A24. So I didn't notice a big difference just based on the screenings that I ended up being able to go to. I probably saw more directors.
Interesting. And what about you, Rachel?
I think on the press side specifically, you could definitely kind of feel it in terms of no interview opportunities being available.
Yeah.
That was kind of the crappier part of it all, was that there just wasn't, not to say directors aren't interesting, but typically speaking, you want to, like, a lot of them are holding back and saying, well, we want to hold the directors back for, for theatrical release or something like that. So the interview opportunities were kind of few and far between. And I think that the strike definitely has an impact on that. In terms of how the crowd's feeling, I honestly can't really say too much on that. I don't think I'd been to enough TIFFs before COVID to know what it was like for, like, just as a crowd, like as an audience member going. But I mean, it does feel different. Like it is a little bit different, because even the things like the In Conversation With, in the past, you would have a lot of Hollywood people come up and do those. And then this year it was pretty much all international stars, I believe. I could be wrong. Like, you can correct me. But I do think that the vast majority of those kind of talks and those industry things ended up being a little bit more international. Although they did have people like Spike Lee came, Guillermo del Toro was here, Pedro Almodola. Who else was here? I think those are like the more well-known ones in the West.
Andy Lau, although
I would still say he's a very Hong Kong person, right? Versus very well-known in the West. But so yeah, it is different. Like the strike does definitely have an effect on what was going on at the festival, but that would be true for any film festival, I would say, at this point.
Interesting. Well, I obviously was not there in person, so I couldn't see anything in person. I got a few screeners. Overall, I saw 6 movies, but there's the caveats of one was a short film and one was technically not seen during TIFF, and that was because I went to the Stop Making Sense one night only simulcast that they had, where after the screening they actually showed the In Conversation With that was moderated by Spike Lee and the band themselves, which was a very awkward experience because the band did not want to be there talking all together, but was a great experience nonetheless. So yeah, I saw 4 movies, I guess you could say then.
Yeah, I was curious about that. When they announced that the whole band was getting back together, I was like, really? Are they being coerced? Why?
Yeah, I don't know. I think this was maybe just an opportunity where they all were being like, hey, we're going to pay you a lot of money, but you all need to be there. And I think the rest of the band was like, damn it, this is a really good opportunity for me to make some money. And David Byrne's like, I don't care. I'm the front man and I'm good no matter what. So if they want to put aside their grudges, they can do that, but I'm going to be me.
Mm-mm.
But it was a fantastic, I had never seen Stop Making Sense before, and seeing it in IMAX was absolutely incredible. It sounded amazing, and I was so glad I finally got to see it on a big screen, which was really cool. It was just a shame I had to drive all the way out to Richmond, which, if you're familiar with the Vancouver area, is a bit of a drive. As Jeff, I'm sure you probably would know what it would be like of having to trek out to Richmond.
Yeah.
But, that's neither here nor there. All right, let us get into some of the major awards. I'm going to kind of rattle off some of the big ones. I'm going to link in the show notes to all of the award winners. And then after I list them off, if either of you have any notes you want to kind of shout out about some of these awards, then we'll definitely talk about it. So we've got the Shortcuts Award for Best Canadian Film, which is Motherland. I'm only bringing that up because we are going to talk about Motherland later. I never know how to pronounce this. The Fabrici Prize went to Seagrass, which is basically like the humanitarian ecumenical type award. Best BIPOC Canadian Feature, Canaval. Best BIPOC Canadian First Feature went to, I'm sorry if I pronounce this incorrectly, Tau Tuk Tavuk, What We See, in Inuit film. Best Canadian Feature Film Award went to Solo. The People's Choice Midnight Madness Award went to Dix the Musical. The People's Choice Documentary Award went to Mr. Dressup, The Magic of Make Believe. The People's Choice Award winner was American Fiction. The second runner-up was The Holdovers, and the third runner-up was The Boy in the Heron. So, saying those, is there anything that sort of jumps out at you? Rachel, we'll start with you.
I think the People's Choice was kind of interesting because there was not a clear front runner. Like a bunch of people, like when you meet up with, others at the festival, that kind of became a topic of like, well, what did you see? What have you seen that's good? Like, what do you think is going to make People's Choice? And there was never a movie that was like, this is absolutely going to be the one, which I think in the past there has been a more clear front runner. And I think that is very indicative of the entire festival of just saying everything was fine. Like everything was good. It was fine. But there wasn't really one that really stuck out. But then when American Fiction, people started watching that, it kind of became very clear that was going to be it in a way, because it was kind of always between that and The Holdovers, I think, because those were the two that I heard the most people talking about in very positive terms. And I didn't get a chance to see American Fiction. I did have a ticket, and then I had to give it away last minute, and I was very upset with myself. But I am looking forward to it, though, because it sounds great. Like it sounds like a really good movie, and a lot of people whose opinions I respect a lot, they were speaking very, very highly of it.
Yeah, I thought I was a little surprised that American Fiction ended up winning the People's Choice, because for me, it sort of seemed to come out of nowhere. I wasn't really hearing about it beforehand. This is the new Jeffrey Wright movie directed by Cord Jefferson. I really thought it was going to be The Holdovers or maybe Hitman, because that would seem to get a lot of press as well. So it definitely felt like a bit of a surprise for me. Jeff, what about you? Do you have any thoughts on the award winners or the People's Choice in particular?
I guess the first thing I want to say about American Fiction is I also missed it, but I was in the rush line to get into the People's Choice Award screening at 5:30 yesterday, and I stood in line until 5:30, and there was still no movement. And at 5:30, I chickened out and went to a different screening that I had a ticket for at 5:45. I heard afterwards that they let in a lot of people for the 5:30 screening. So I probably could have gotten in. But that's okay, because at the very least, American Fiction has a release date, and I am excited to see it. But what you were just saying about it kind of coming out of nowhere, I think that what's kind of interesting to me about that is it's one that, yeah, all the people that I know who, weren't physically on the ground in Toronto, they also went, what's this movie? Where did this come from? But if you were there, like, it was one of the first movies, I think it was the first movie to get an additional screening that wasn't scheduled in advance. A lot of people were like, it started to become like very slowly started to become like a hot ticket outside, like next to Hitman as well. And so when it did finally win, I wouldn't necessarily say I was fully expecting it, but it wasn't surprising when it won. And in fact, it was like the least surprising. I was like, oh, that makes sense, because that's the one that keeps getting extra screenings, and that's the one that people keep saying is really, really good. Yeah, that's the one. Going in, I wouldn't have expected it, because I think I first heard about it like 3 days after it premiered. But, once you start looking at like what was going on and the extra screenings it was getting and hearing people talk about it, it was like, this is actually not that surprising a choice.
Interesting. I think what's most interesting now is, not including this year, 14 of the last 15 People's Choice winners have gone on to be nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, with 5 of them winning. I would say at this point, that means it's all but assured a spot in the Best Picture lineup. Jeff, I know you care way more about the Oscars than Rachel does. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Yes. I guess the strike right now sort of puts everything with awards season sort of into a weird state where it's kind of where anything could happen. but I would say that, especially with a lot of movies moving out of their 2023 release dates, I can't really see how this misses anymore. Like, if it had still won People's Choice Award, and we were getting things like Dune and the other 3 or 4 things that got moved this year that were potential Best Picture nominees, then like maybe it would maybe it would be a little less guaranteed, but I honestly don't see how it misses, considering it doesn't have that competition. And hopefully it's really good and should be there anyway.
Yeah, it's sort of funny where I feel like this year is sort of similar to the COVID years where things kept getting pushed around and the release dates kept changing. And because of that, and also the lack of in-person, screenings and things like that, we got some interesting smaller nominees in the Oscars, and this could also be a beneficiary of that as well. So it's certainly going to be interesting to track. I know a lot of people, Oscar insiders, are having their doubts because this movie is being released by MGM Amazon, which last year they had Women Talking and they completely butchered the rollout for that. And a lot of people were expecting it to be a major player and ended up only getting 2 nominations. So there's the concern that American Fiction could suffer the same fate as Women Talking did last year.
Well, I won't dwell too much longer on it, but just for what it's worth, with Women Talking, I feel like the marketing campaign for that, or at least the awards campaign for that, was heavily bungled. But in no small part, having seen Women Talking, that's because a lot of the categories are a little harder to do. Like in Women Talking, who do you push as lead actress? Who do you push as supporting actress? So like those are already 2 categories that are very difficult for it to do. Where with American Fiction, it sounds like the lead is very clearly Jeffrey Wright. And so at the very least, when it comes to promoting it by category, those categories should be a little more clear cut than with Women Talking. Not that Women Talking was, entirely just too difficult to market. Like they could have done a better job, but I think that it'll be a lot less easy, a lot easier to not mess up with American Fiction.
Okay, fair enough. Rachel, do you have any last thoughts about the award winners as a whole before we move on?
No, other than just American Fiction, I think is kind of the ideal candidate, I think, for TIFF in that it's premiered at the festival, as I said before, and it really is a movie that actually benefits from TIFF and benefits from winning that award, whereas something like The Holdovers, I don't think it needed the People's Choice Award. I think that was always going to be a movie in the conversation regardless. So I think it's kind of nice in a way that American Fiction won. And obviously it winning just shows, like, the thing I like about the People's Choice Award is that it really is voted by people who actually watched the movie versus a jury or, so on and so forth. So I think that it is a real testament to the movie. And I wish I had seen it so that I could actually talk about whether or not it is good. But I mean, it sounds like it's amazing. So it's nice. It's nice to see a movie like that get that prize because I think it will benefit, or it has already benefited quite a bit from winning it.
Fair.
Last year when they programmed the Fablemans, that was from the moment it was announced, it was like, this one is going to get the People's Choice Award. And it did. And like, it deserved it, sure. But like Rachel was saying with American Fiction, like, or with The Holdovers, the Fablemans didn't need that award.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. All right. Well, let us start talking about some of the movies that some of us saw, mostly the 2 of you, and I'm going to sit here and be a rapt audience listening to you praise these movies. So let's start with The Holdovers. Rachel, I'd love to get your thoughts on it first.
So Holdovers is, I would say, Alexander Payne's best movie in, at least 10 years. It's a good one, but I will caveat that with, I'm not a massive Alexander Payne fan, generally speaking. I don't really flock to his movies, but this one, I went in, not that I didn't want to like it. I just didn't think I would like it. It just didn't seem like my bag, that it just didn't seem like a movie that I would really enjoy that much. And then I came out of it thinking, this is absolutely delightful. It is a wonderful holiday movie. But beyond that, it is just, it fits into the category of, I think, of the warm blanket film. And I 100% understand all of the praise that it got during Venice, and I don't know if it played at Telluride, but yeah, I think it's very, very well deserving of all the praise that it's getting. And Paul Giamatti really is absolutely fantastic in this movie. But there is a new actor, Dominic Sessa, who plays the main kid in it. He's not a kid; he's like a teenager, but he's absolutely wonderful. And this was his very, very first movie that he had ever been in. And Alexander Payne said in the Q&A that, you know, he's already got management now. He's like, you know, he's auditioning for new things. Like, he's set, he's good. But he was great in this. And and Davine Joy Randolph as well. She was fantastic in a supporting role, but very, very well done as well. So I would highly recommend it. I believe it's going to come out in Canada towards the end of October. So go check it out. And the States as well for any American listeners.
And Jeff, what about you? What were your thoughts on the Holdovers?
I mean, I thought basically the same things. I also went into this not expecting to dislike it, but expecting to be sort of like meh on it. And I came out of it thinking it was just really great. I guess specifically what I thought was interesting is, this is my first Alexander Payne film, I think, consciously anyway. I've been meaning to watch Nebraska since it came out because I very much like the name of that movie, but I just never got around to it. This movie felt like weirdly relevant to me specifically because it takes place in a boarding school, and I went to a boarding school. There's other movies that felt way more relevant to me than just one thing, but just because of that, like I could really like put myself in this world, and I thought that he did a really good job of that. I thought that Paul Giamatti was amazing. Dominic Sessa is very good. I think that maybe I was just too focused on Paul Giamatti's performance. I think he is he is very standout and kind of hard to look away from in this movie. So maybe I was too drawn to that. But I thought that the three lead performances, him, Dominic Sessa, and Davine Joy Randolph, were really, really good. And I'm actually very excited to see this one again when it comes out because of, I think this is one that, like, if it's still around on Christmas, which I hope it is because it is a Christmas movie, this is one I kind of want to go take my parents to see. I think they would like it, and I think that I would really like the experience of taking them to a movie that they don't hate. So
it's funny. I'm surprised this movie is coming out in October because it does feel like the perfect holiday Christmas movie to come out. So it's definitely surprising. I just want to call out Rachel. You said it's probably your favorite Alexander Payne movie in the last decade. And so I was like, oh, what has he done in the last decade? Payne is not exactly a prolific director. He's only made 2 movies in the last decade. And if you go back almost 20 years, he's only made 5 movies in that span. So it's not like he's pumping these movies out at a rapid pace.
Yeah, but in the last 10 years, this is definitely his best one.
You're comparing it to like Downsizing and then Nebraska.
And in comparison to Nebraska and Downsizing, Holdovers is much better than both of those.
I like Nebraska. It is a very good one. So, Jeff, if you do eventually get to it, I think you'd probably enjoy it. It features a very lovely Bruce Stern performance.
I'm hoping that I'll get the chance to watch it here in the next couple of days.
Nice. Okay. Well, then one that I'm very curious and excited to hear your thoughts on about, Jeff, considering the fact that you have devoted an entire season of your own podcast to Anna Kendrick. I'd love to know a bit more about Woman of the Hour.
Well, Woman of the Hour is actually Anna Kendrick's directorial debut. Not only is it the most recent movie that she stars in, but she directed it, and she directs it really, really, really well. It's a very well-directed movie. Specifically, I think she's great in it. I think she's good in it. I think that she does a very typical Anna Kendrick role, which is something I always like, but it's not a very challenging role for her. But the real standout of this movie is Daniel Zavato as a man named Rodney Alcala. The plot of this movie is, or like Woman of the Hour, is about an episode of the game show The Dating Game in 1978, where like the idea was they would bring on an eligible bachelorette, and she would interview 3 eligible bachelors, and at the very end she'd like win an all expenses paid date with whichever one of them she picked. And on this episode, this is the thing that really happened on The Dating Game. One of the bachelors, the guy who won, was a man named Rodney Alcala, who was in the middle of a decades-long murder spree, which took the lives of at least 8 victims and possibly as many as 120.
Holy.
Yeah, he's a very prolific serial killer. And this movie was really interesting in that it managed to, like, it framed everything around just this one episode, and managed to give a lot of characterization to Cheryl Bradshaw. That's Anna Kendrick's character, the person who's the eligible bachelorette on The Dating Game, as well as like give kind of a holistic picture of Rodney Alcala's prolific career, I'll say, through sort of like an interesting approach to nonlinear storytelling. Sort of like flashes back and forward a lot. And I think that like it was pretty good. All of those things are like done decently well. I guess the only thing I can really say about it is I don't know exactly what it is, but like it's good, not great. It feels like a really, really good directorial debut, but it does still feel like a debut.
Mm. Now, are you going to resurrect the Kickin' It with Kendrick series to talk about this movie?
Yeah, my idea, we have to find the right guest, because that series, the whole point of that series is supposed to be the guests, and so I want to get a good guest for it. I would like to talk about this one and Alice Darling, because I think they both touch on very similar themes, which me and Pierre will not be able to speak to from a place of experience. They touch on the experience of being a woman, which we can't do very well. So, but I think it's really interesting to like see those perspectives and what this movie does. I find this movie, Woman of the Hour, particularly hopeless, like kind of in not fully the opposite, but it is kind of a companion piece to Alice Darling, which kind of ends on not a positive note, but it has like a tiny little bit of an upturn at the end, where this one is, I think the thing that sticks out to me about this movie more than anything else is every single guy sucks a lot. And like, not even in obvious ways. The people who are the most, like the nicest, most generally good people in this movie still ultimately want something and are kind of scumbags at heart. And and like there's nothing to refute that in this movie. I don't think there has to be. I think this movie just ends up being like kind of hopeless for it, which isn't a bad thing. But it means that, you know, we need to find an appropriate guest who can sort of speak to that from a better place than Pierre or I, as straight men in Canada, can do.
Fair enough. Maybe you need to frame it as having an eligible bachelorette to come on and maybe a third guy, and then she can lead the conversation.
Oh my God, that sounds awesome.
It's okay. You can have that idea for free. Rachel, what were your thoughts on Woman of the Hour?
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a well-done movie. I agree with Jeff. It's a great debut for Anna Kendrick, but I think I almost expect that of an actor like her, who has been around for so long and has worked with so many great directors herself. I expect that if you're going to get behind the camera and do that yourself, then that means you've probably hopefully been picking up a lot from other people that you've worked with, which I think that she has done. The story itself is pretty unbelievable. I didn't know anything about that serial killer beforehand. And I do appreciate that, rather than looking from the perspective of the serial killer, we looked at the perspective of various women who were victims of him. And yeah, it's interesting. I think the whole dating game thing is kind of the weird thing that happened. Like, that's the fact that this guy felt he had enough, for lack of a better term, he just had enough balls on him to be like, I'm going to go out on national television, even though I've been raping and killing women for however many years at that point. And yeah, it's just the audacity of being able to do that, and which I think comes across in the movie. But I do come away from it, and I know that it got bought by Netflix, and I think that it is a very good Netflix movie. Again, I don't know what that means when I say it's a good Netflix movie, but I think it's not one that's necessarily going to blow you away, but it is a good movie about a topic that I don't know how many people are aware of it at this point. And so it's an interesting story at minimum. But yeah, so I did enjoy it though.
Very interesting. Well, I'm excited for it. And much like Alice Darling, it is technically a Canadian co-production. So maybe it will show up at the Canadian Screen Awards later this year, and we can talk about it more when that happens. Or I guess next year, not this year. Yeah,
potentially. Actually, it's a good point. Anna Kendrick does seem to like Canada, Toronto specifically. Yeah. She has a thing for this place. It's nice.
Ever since Scott Pilgrim, it seems like.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Speaking of Anna Kendrick projects coming out this year, we got another Scott Pilgrim coming out within the month.
Very, very excited about that. All right, well, let us move on to the next movie. Rachel, do you want to talk a bit about Dream Scenario?
Oh, this was such a weird movie. So it's a great movie, but it is so weird. I knew nothing about it going into it, and I would suggest, this kind of defeats the point because I'm about to talk about it, but it is such a strange movie that I don't know really what can prepare you for it. The basic premise is that Nick Cage, his character, is just this ordinary man, just an everyday guy. He's so bland, he blends into the wallpaper kind of guy. But not in a negative way. He just lives his life like probably the majority of people in this world. You just go about your business. But for some reason, and they never explain why, he eventually starts popping up into people's dreams. And as just a guy in the background, he's just like, extraordinary things are happening in a dream. And then this guy in, a sweater and a collared shirt just kind of pops up in the background, just casually walking by, and just kind of waves and continues on his way. And his character is annoyed that he's not doing anything. Like, he's not trying to help. He's not trying to be, of any use. He's just there in the background. So the movie basically makes a lot of commentary about kind of, I suppose, the instant celebrity that a lot of people can get today. And just the wave that takes you on. So you kind of have the initial peak of everybody loving you and wanting a picture with you. And then, I'm not going to spoil why, but then all of a sudden his fame just plummets. It just drops down to an all-time low. And then he is scorned from society. And it looks at, people trying to profit off of this new thing that is happening that nobody can really explain, but nobody cares to explain it. I think it is Cage at probably one of his best roles, I have to say, because he is playing such a normal person, and we don't normally see Cage playing a normal person. So it's got shades of Nightmare on Elm Street. It's got shades of Being John Malkovich. But it is very enjoyable and very strange. And it has one of the most awkward scenes I've seen in any movie. It is incredible, but it is very funny as well, I have to say.
I'm very excited for this one. Jeff, what about you?
So I was really excited going into this because Nicolas Cage is my favorite actor, obviously. But then as well, this is from a director named Christopher Borgli, who last year put out a movie called Sick of Myself, which I watched actually just before the festival. And it's kind of a movie about addiction. It's about a girl who in order to get attention, starts taking illegal pharmaceuticals and gives herself a permanent skin condition. And I won't say more about it than that, but like I watched that movie and it really messed me up for like probably 4 or 5 days. It's one of those movies that just stuck with me for that long, which doesn't happen very often. And so I was pretty excited going into this one. And it didn't disappoint. I really, really enjoyed it. And what I thought was really cool is I got to see the premiere of this one that had a Q&A at the end. And Christopher Borgley talked a little bit about the inspiration for this movie. And he said there was like a few years ago, like probably, I don't know if it was necessarily at the height of the Me Too movement, but it was sort of in the aftermath of that. There were a lot of professors, especially in Europe, who, would go on to talk shows and be like, I don't know why I'm losing my job. I didn't do anything. And he was like, all right, well, what if we just like humor that opinion for a second? What if we just, what if there was actually a professor who had no idea what he did and it ruined his career somehow and it was actually out of his control? And that's how he came up with the idea of this professor who, he appears in people's dreams. And that is because those are other people's dreams. That's entirely out of his control, at least as far as we know in the movie. Like they don't explain why he is in other people's dreams. But, people start seeing him differently because everyone knows him now since he's in their dreams. But like what he does in their dreams is how they know him. So that ends up, becoming his entire reputation, not anything that he's built up for himself up to that point, but, these random little occurrences that are completely outside of his control. And I think it plays with that idea in a really, really interesting way. It has, I think I know the awkward scene that Rachel's referring to, but in addition to that, there's still so many other scenes that really stick with me just because they're so, like, they could only really happen in this movie. There's a scene in a gym, which I think is hilarious, and I still think about sometimes. But anyway, basically, this was very early on one of my favorites of the festival, and the only reason it isn't still is because I managed to see a lot of very good movies that I guess I thought were better, but it's still in my top 10.
Nice. Yeah, it's one I'm excited for. It's going to be distributed by Neon. So they are able to properly promote it because Neon signed the agreement, the interim agreement with the striking unions. So it'll be sort of interesting if maybe this gets a bit more of a push. I don't know if it will because it does seem like it's pretty out of the ordinary, I guess is the best way to describe it. But yeah, hopefully this gets a bit of an audience.
And in terms of awards, I think it's probably a huge contender for some of the smaller awards, like the Spirits and stuff.
Oh,
I don't know if I see it at the Oscars, but I would love to see it at the Oscars. That would be great.
I mean, if they didn't nominate Nicolas Cage for Pig, I don't think they're going to nominate him for this.
I could see it going for script, for writing. I could see that happening because it is a sound script. I'll say that much.
And it's very unique. Yeah. There's nothing else quite like it, even at the festival.
Yeah, I agree.
Nice. Okay. Well, moving on, the next movie we're going to talk about is one called Humanist Vampire Seeking Consenting Suicidal Person, which I'm not going to lie, the reason why I watched this movie was because of the title alone. That's a pretty amazing title. But basically, this is a French-Canadian film about a young girl who is a vampire. Well, she's not actually a young girl. I think she says she's 800 or 80 or whatever it is. I guess 80 years old. But
62.
62. Thank you for actually taking notes in the movie that you reviewed when I did not. But yeah, so she is in the body of a teenage girl, and she is adverse to causing harm to other people, which as a vampire is a little bit difficult since in order to live, you need to suck the blood from other people, which basically either turns them into vampires or kills them if you suck enough blood. So it's basically this young girl's struggle to figure out how to be a vampire when the rest of her family is basically trying to force her to feed, and she does not want to. And so she decides the best way to do it is find someone who wants to kill themselves and basically give them assisted suicide by drinking their blood. And so she meets a actual teenage boy who she befriends, who is suicidal, and then becomes the moral quandary of whether or not she should take his blood or not, as she sort of learns more about him and tries to help him with his bucket list of last things he wants to do before he dies. I really like this. I also want to watch it because it stars Sarah Monpetit, who was in Falcon Lake last year, which was a movie that was nominated at the Canadian Screen Awards. A movie I was pretty mixed on, but I really enjoyed her performance. And once again, really enjoy her performance here as this sort of sullen, sulky teenage vampire who refuses to... she's basically a vegetarian vampire. So a very interesting concept. It's chock full of French Canadian comedy. I know this is a subject that like you, Rachel, Matthew, myself have all kind of talked about this idea of what a French Canadian comedy is, and something that Simon, Matthew's co-host on Awesome Friday, doesn't really get. It's definitely a unique humor, but I'm pretty sure both of you saw this movie, so I'd be curious to hear what you both thought about it. Jeff, you wrote about the movie, so if you want to talk about it a little bit too.
Oh, I have a tiny bit of a soapbox for this movie, so if you want to come to me last.
Okay, Rachel, we'll start with you then.
Well, Jeff, here's your lucky day. I didn't actually end up watching this movie, so
all
floor's all yours.
Soapbox away.
All right, so this movie is like not subtle about being about medical assistance and dying, in my opinion. I thought that is like very clearly what this is about, and then at the very end, it's made explicit in ways that I won't talk about to avoid spoiling the movie.
Yes,
but I thought that I don't know. I feel kind of weird about the topic of medical assistance in dying, specifically in movies, because I think that a lot of movies, it's a really, really complicated topic that, I don't know, probably lends itself to movies correctly, but I have yet to see a movie that does it really well. I think Plan 75 might be the closest to doing it well, and it's still not perfect. But in this movie, I found that a lot of it was... So the main conceit is that she only wants to kill someone who wants to die. But then as they get to know each other, she kind of, through helping him through his bucket list, kind of ends up making his life worse and putting him into a condition, putting him into a situation where the only way out is suicide or some kind of death. And I think that it's kind of unfortunate because for, people that do turn to suicide or turn to some way of choosing to end their lives, no one does that because they think it's like a cool option. Like, people only do that because there is no other way out. And I think that what this movie does that I'm a little sort of mixed on is it feels like the way that they get there and the way that they sort of make the main character feel like he has no way out and has to die is by specifically making his life worse over the course of the entire movie. And so when at the very end when they... feel like I'm spoiling the movie too much, but when it comes down to it, it's like they never sort of investigate any kind of way of fixing the problems that have brought him to this point, or trying to improve his life, or investigating why his life is where it is. Because this is a movie where a guy wants to kill himself because he's been bullied. And so what they do is they do a bunch of things to potentially fix the bullying problem, but all they do is make things worse the whole way, except that they know that the things that they're doing are going to make things worse. So I think it's kind of it's unfortunate that it doesn't it takes on such a societally loaded topic and chooses to address it almost entirely without any care to the society that, that makes this a relevant topic.
Yeah, I understand where you're getting at. I think for me, that aspect didn't bother me as much, but I totally understand where you're coming from.
One of my mom works in medical assistance in dying as well. So like I have a slight personal connection, and that's something that I'm very interested in. So when I didn't watch this movie for the reason that it was about that. It just kind of happened. I watched it because it had a funny title.
Yeah.
But like when that subject comes up in movies, I am probably much more critical than I would be of, other movies, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I think based on reading your review, you did sort of appreciate some of the side characters and their performances as well. So there is some humor there, but I understand that if the quagmire of deciphering the pros and cons and whether or not it all works out in the end, the idea of using vampires for assisted suicide is a bit of a murky subject.
I guess like what I want to say here is, even though I've spent all of the time that I've been talking about this movie in an audio format to sort of rag on it, I did actually like this movie. I think it does much more right than it does wrong. I think the characters are really cute, are like really cute and actually really good most of the time as well. I specifically liked, I believe her name is Sophie Cadieux, her aunt. Her aunt has a really wonderful arc that I think is hilarious. I also, he wasn't in it for very long, but I always love seeing Steve LaPlante in things. In general, I think that this movie works really well as a comedy. It's just where it starts to delve into its social commentary that I think it misses the mark, to the point where I wouldn't have even I don't even think it should have the social commentary, because I don't think it engages with it well. But as a kind of a romantic comedy, or as you were saying, like a Quebec comedy, I think it works really well.
Yeah, this is obviously another Canadian movie, so it might come into play for the CSAs. I'll be curious to see if it gets some nominations for that. But Jeff, if you want to lead us in our next movie, which is, we talked off about it at the top of the show, which is Hitman.
So I actually saw someone say something really interesting about this movie that I'm going to steal. And it's specifically relevant because I was just talking about Humanist Vampire being kind of a romantic comedy. I saw someone say, "You've heard about elevated horror movies. Now get ready for an elevated romantic comedy," which is kind of what Hitman is. It's really cool. I am so excited for people to see this one. I had to fight to get my tickets for this one at Toronto because I didn't initially book it. And then once it started getting rave reviews, I was like, oh, but I'm going to go see the new Jamie Foxx movie. Wait a minute. That comes out in October and Hitman might not come out at all. So I'm going to go see that one, actually. Hitman is a movie from Richard Linklater and Glenn Powell. Glenn Powell, who stars and also wrote the script with Richard Linklater. It's about a psychology teacher who moonlights as a fake hitman doing entrapment for the police in Louisiana, somewhere in Louisiana. And what's really cool about this movie is that in order to be really good at his job as a fake hitman, he sort of has to adapt his persona for everyone that he for everyone that he meets with, because he needs to be their ideal hitman so that they, say the things that he wants them to say. So what you get is Glenn Powell in essentially 15 different relatively small roles in this movie, which are almost which are consistently hilarious. All of them are so funny because of the over-the-top characters he picks to be believable to, one person who wants to hire a hitman. I guess the main story concerns one of his potential clients he gets a little more wrapped up with than he probably should. And that's where this becomes an elevated romantic comedy. I feel like I'm just sort of explaining the entire movie at this point. So before I do that too much, I want to say this was really good. And I want to make sure that Rachel still has stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I love this movie. It's very fun. Glenn Powell's really good in it. It's a different type of Linklater, and also the chemistry between Glenn Powell and Adria Arjona, who plays the female lead. They're seriously sexy. I came away from this movie being like, this is the sexiest thing I've seen at TIFF. And that's not really saying much because there wasn't really a lot of sexy stuff at TIFF. But the point is, this is a good crowd pleaser. It is definitely more on like the R-rated side. But it is a really, really fun movie. And I think I would find it difficult to believe people not really enjoying it because it's just fun. Like it's a different type of Linklater though, for sure.
I am super excited for this. I love Linklater. I love Glenn Powell. I thought he was great in Everybody Wants Some, another Linklater movie. So this is one I'm definitely very, very excited about and is high up on my wish list to see.
It plays well in a crowd too. I'd say like this is, I know it's, if we just said earlier it's going to come out on Netflix, but I do hope that they do like a good theatrical run for this one because I do think it's a fun one to watch amongst like a good group of people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we know Netflix, and they'll probably do a week in New York and LA, and that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope they can do better than that, but I think that recently someone said why they do like a week in limited markets and then straight to streaming, so they're not going to change that reasoning.
Yeah, it's just to get for award eligibility.
Awards eligibility, and if it doesn't have a full, I think there's like some financial incentive to keep it as short as possible.
Yes, yeah, because they don't give residuals for the streaming, but they do for in theaters, and often in the contracts it has to have a theatrical release, so they do it as limited as possible. It's a very scummy way of Netflix and other streamers avoiding paying people that deserve the money.
It's also cutting into, because like they would have to pay the theaters as well, right? So it kind of cuts into their profits a little bit. But I know in Canada, Netflix and Cineplex have a horrendous relationship. And so that's why a lot of things like even something like, what was that? All Quiet on the Western Front last year, it didn't get played really at any Cineplex theater, or I shouldn't say any, but certainly in Toronto, it was only playing at like Landmark and then the Lightbox Theater, and I don't recall any Cineplex theaters getting it. So it is a little grimy business that Netflix is doing, but it's too bad because I really think Hitman is a good crowd pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm excited for it. And then the last movie want to very briefly talk about, it is a short film, and I mentioned earlier that it won the Shortcuts Award for Best Canadian Film. That is Motherland. And I really like this movie. The reason why I specifically wanted to watch this one is because the lead actor in it is someone that I actually went to acting school with at Humber College, Baytash Fazlali. So it was really cool. When I got an email from Route 504 with their TIFF slate and seeing my former classmate's photo in the press images, it was really fun to see that. And so I was able to get a screener link for that and watch it, and it was really good. It was directed by Jasmine Mozaffari, and it's a short film about a young man who's a student in the U.S., a university student in the late 1970s, right when the U.S. and Iranian relations are at their worst, and there's fears of all Iranian Americans being deported back to Iran. And so he plays someone who has to deal with that fear, but then he is also about to go with his white girlfriend to meet her parents for the first time, and what sort of drama ensues when there's this sort of public outrage towards a certain ethnic or people from certain countries, what they have to deal with. And Baytash was excellent in this movie, so it was really nice to see him in a short film. And this movie looks absolutely incredible. It looks like it was shot in the 70s with nice film grain look to it. So it's really cool. Jeff, I saw that you logged in on Letterboxd. You watched it as well, right?
Yeah, I watched it just before. I watched it just before this, just before we started recording, and I thought it was really good. I thought that. Sorry, what did you say the lead actor's name was?
His name is Baytash.
Baytash was fantastic in this. And I really, the first thing that stuck out to me as well was the visual of it, the 70s film grain aesthetic. I think that one thing I really liked about it was this movie, I would say probably the biggest moment of this movie is a conversation that he has with his girlfriend's father. Mm-hmm. And I think that is it's a really, really well done conversation. Her father is also an immigrant from a very different place. And I think that what that conversation does is it's able to sort of put general anti-immigrant sentiments versus, what was going on at the time into really interesting perspective. Because even though her father can relate to Baytash's character in a lot of ways, being a first-generation immigrant and basically not being from around there and being made fun of specifically for those reasons, he also shares the same anti-Iranian sentiment that is going around at the time in very important ways, which I think is, I think it's just really well done. I think that it's very popular to make movies about anti-immigrant sentiment, but it's very rare to see them done really, really well. And I think that this one does that really well.
Yeah. Rachel, did you end up being able to catch this one or no?
I didn't. No, sorry. I will though. You sent me the link for it, so I will take a look at it. Because I think it won. Did it win an award? Because I believe.
Yes, it won Best Canadian Short.
Thank you. You probably did say that. I am paying attention.
It's all right. I've only said it twice before.
Sorry, I am paying attention. Not on Instagram at all.
It's all good. So just wanted to give a quick shout out to that one. I know short films are obviously hard for people to catch if you're not watching them in a festival setting. So who knows if this will ever pop up anywhere. But if you do get the chance, it's a very interesting short film. I guess the last thing I kind of want to end on, if the two of you want to name like your favorite and your least favorite movies that you saw during the festival, just as one last little shout out. Jeff, we'll start with you.
My favorite movie that I saw was called The Teacher's Lounge. I talk a lot more about it on our episode, so go and watch that. Go and listen to that. My least favorite movie I saw was called Green Border, which I also talk a lot more about on our episode. But specifically, just in reference to Motherland, Green Border is also a movie about anti-immigrant sentiment that I think is done extremely poorly. Motherland is done very well. Green Border is done very, very badly.
Yeah, I was very surprised because Green Border is directed by Agnieszka Holland, who is a pretty prolific director. So I was a little surprised to see it so low on your list. But Teacher's Lounge, I'm excited because that's actually playing at the Vancouver International Film Festival, and I never heard of it before. And seeing you rave about it and topping your TIFF list definitely makes me want to check it out.
My Letterboxd review of that is probably like 1,000 words because I had to stop somewhere. Like I would have written twice that. I'm excited to see it again. It's one that I will recommend to everyone I know and have recommended as much as I've been able to so far. I really, really want people to see that one. It's Sony Pictures Classics, so no one will see it, but I hope that people get the opportunity somehow.
Fair enough. Rachel, I know I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, but do you have a high and a low you want to mention?
I'm just going to say Teacher's Lounge. I have also heard great things about that. I haven't seen it, but one of my colleagues watched it and she adored it. And she told me that I would really like it too. So I'm going to figure out a way to track that down. In terms of my favorite, I actually have to admit, I think Holdovers is probably my favorite. But because I already talked about that, I'm going to shout out another movie called Fitting In, which is a Canadian film by Molly McGlynn. And that is going to come out in Canada beginning of November, I think November 3rd. And it's a really great coming of age movie about a young woman who's diagnosed with something called MRKH syndrome. And that means that she was born without a uterus, without a cervix, and a shortened vaginal canal. The thing that I really enjoyed about that movie is it's obviously a very serious topic, and it's actually Molly McGlynn's story herself. So it's very personal for her, for the director. But the amount of humor she was able to find in it, I found absolutely astounding. And I would recommend anybody to go watch it because I think it is, it's a really, really great, wholesome movie. And it's one of those coming of age movies that I saw that I thought this is a perfect movie for the generation that is currently coming up in this world, because she sets the movie not when she was growing up, but she sets it in present day, which I think is a very inspired choice. So I would recommend Fitting In. I think that is playing at a number of Canadian festivals as well. So check that one out. My low is probably a movie called The Critic, which was it's this British period. It's like, it should be good. It's got Ian McKellen, Gemma Arterton. I struggle with her name so much. Arterton.
I know.
I don't know why. But Gemma, my girl Gemma is in it. And Mark Strong is in it. I think this is one of the movies that I put up in when we were doing the TIFF preview, that this was one that I was really looking forward to. It's just such a bland movie. Like, it is everything you think that it could be or should be, it is not. And I know that you shouldn't judge a movie for what you thought it was going to be. You just judge it for what it is. But for what it is just not that interesting. And it's just very vanilla. And it's odd that it's so vanilla. It's kind of frustrating how vanilla it is. But I would also say they kind of make London look very artificial and very fake. And I've never seen that done in a movie before. So in a way, hats off to that film for doing it that. But yeah, I was very disappointed in The Critic, I have to say.
That's unfortunate. Yeah, I do remember you talking about that. All right. Well, I think that is a great place to wrap things up. I thought that was an excellent overview of some of the highs that the TIFF had to offer this year. Jeff, I really want to thank you for coming on and talking about some of the 40 movies that you saw this year, which is absolutely incredible. But yeah, where can people find your work, follow you, all that great stuff? What are you working on? What do you want to promote? Please talk.
Well, right now, Pierre and I, you can always find Pierre and I on Spotify at Classic Movies Live. We've got a lot of cool ideas for episodes. Honestly, it's mostly just a shame that neither of us would be able to handle recording every day because we have so many cool ideas that I'm very excited for coming out. We've got another series that realistically we're not going to be able to do quite the same way as our Leo or Anna series that we tried or that we did, but that I am also very excited about. It's based on a very funny image that I saw on the internet a few weeks ago, and I think we can get 60 episodes out of it.
Oh my goodness.
So anyway, lots of cool stuff to look forward to. You can find us on Spotify. Other than that, I currently have some reviews on Contra Zoom on the Contra Zoom website, and hopefully I will be able to do a couple more soon. I don't know when. I'm not working on any actively. Other than that, that's kind of what we're doing right now. We're in a bit of a slow period, but we're going to ramp up.
Nice. Well, I don't want to reveal anything too soon, but you and I are working on some more coverage of something else that is coming later this month or next month, I guess it is. And so it won't be the last time your work will probably be seen on the website and on this podcast. But yeah, we will link to your reviews and your show Classic Movies Live in the show notes. But Rachel, this is a very loaded question asking you, what have you been working on? Because I quickly pulled up what you've been working on, and you were pumping out reviews like a madwoman. So I don't know if there's a couple you want to highlight that you want people to check out, because I don't think I have enough character room to link to everything that you did during TIFF.
Yeah, so all of my reviews for TIFF are on split between POV Magazine, Exclaim, and one on the Asian cut. I do need to do a couple more for them. But I think the two things that I'd like to highlight are a conversation I had with the filmmakers of Mr. Dress Up, The Power of Make-Believe, which won, what was the award again? People's Choice Documentary, I think that's what it's called.
Yes.
So yeah, won that. Great Canadian doc. I think if you're of a certain age, I think that film will do really well with you. So I got to chat with the director and two of the producers. And that's on POV. And also on POV, this is a much lesser known one, but there was a short film called Aphasia by Marielle Ladelpe. I probably said her last name wrong, and I'm sorry, Marielle. But I had a really great conversation with her about the short film. And that was probably, I mean, no offense to the Mr. Dress Up guys, but that was probably my favorite thing that I did during TIFF, was just to get to talk to her about making that short, because I think it's a pretty incredible one. And it's going to be on the National Film Board, probably for free at some point.
Nice. Well, I'll make sure to link to those, and I'll pick a couple of the other ones of movies that we talked about. But yeah, you'll be able to find all of Rachel's work across those many platforms, and her usual socials as well, at _RachelKH and
Thank you.
RachelHo.com and all that great stuff.
Thank you very much.
But yeah, so that wraps up this episode. This has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. You can follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads at contrazoompod. What did you see at TIFF this year? Send an email to contrazoompod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music, and to Stephanie Pry for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.